Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Commissioner.
This is a very nice sound system.
Yes.
Welcome to the CRTPA retreat. It's Tuesday, October 19th at 9:17. We've spent the last 15 minutes or so doing welcome, so I think we can jump straight into today's material. So we'll start with the multi-use trail safety review.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think we'll turn that over to Jack for an introduction, and we'll get going with it.
Thank you, Greg. Commissioners, good morning. Commissioner Barfield, hello.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Glad you could find a place.
Yes, Betsy Barfield, Jefferson County, Commissioner, District 4. Next time we'll have the event in Jefferson County so we can find it. Yes, right? Glad to be here. Thank you.
So, talking about Thomasville Road Multi-Use Path Safety Review, at the September meeting, we were asked to take a look at some opportunities and some review some other trails in and around the area and national and state or state and national locations that we can take a look at for comparative purposes to the Thomasville Road Multi-Use Path. And so what ended up happening is we initially identified about 20 different trails and narrowed that down to 8. And so we have Lindsay and Stephen from Kimley Horn and Associates here today that are going to make a presentation regarding the multi-use path.
Okay, so like Jack said, my name's Stephen Miller. I'm here with Kimley Horn and Associates, and we conducted a safety review for some comparable corridors to Thomasville Road from Benton Road to Metropolitan Boulevard. So these are the roads we looked at on a...
Could you adjust your mic a little bit? Having a little difficulty hearing you.
Can you not hear me very well?
Yeah, just move,
It's
yeah.
real muffled.
Yeah, you're muffled with your mask on.
Can you remove
How about now?
Yes, better.
I got to keep my mask on is what they told me.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm trying to follow rules. But as you can see here, we have some local, state, and national roads listed.
Better.
We chose these roads based on the characteristics that follow. We reviewed all of these corridors, and they have an 8 to 12 foot paved path adjacent to the roadway with a buffer that's consistent to the possible buffer between Thomasville Road and the facility under evaluation as part of the feasibility study. And they also each have a posted speed limit that's similar to that along Thomasville Road. They also have an annual average daily traffic volume, which is number of vehicles traversing the road each day, that's similar to that along Thomasville Road. Surrounding land uses are similar. Thomasville Road has largely residential and commercial / business land uses along it for this segment, and each of these corridors also have the same surrounding land uses, as well as the number of driveway openings / curb cuts, which is anywhere the curb is broken for a driveway for a business, a residential subdivision, a house, an intersecting street, anything like that. And so we, as Jack said, we narrowed this down from a list of about 20 corridors that we determined from reaching out to our partners around the country with Kimley Horn to determine some comparable corridors to that of Thomasville Road. And so as you can see, on a local level, we have Lafayette Street and Franklin Boulevard. On a state level, US 1 Overseas Trail in Marathon, Florida. The Cross Seminole Trail in Sanford, Florida, just north of Orlando. Cortez Boulevard in Spring Hill, Florida. And then on a national level, we reviewed North Walton Boulevard in Bentonville, Arkansas, Falls of Noose Road in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Dallas Road in Dallas, Texas. So the characteristics that define Thomasville Road, Thomasville Road has a posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour, an average annual daily traffic volume that varies between 30,000 and 34,000 vehicles per day. The reason that varies is DOT has multiple count locations for the 2.41 mile segment we reviewed, and so the counts are different at each of those count locations. In the 2.41 mile segment we reviewed for Thomasville Road, there were 44 driveway openings. Again, that's just anywhere traffic can cross over the trail along the road. And so for that, as you can see in the footnotes there, on the east side of Thomasville Road from Benton Road to Woodgate is where those driveway openings were counted, and then on the west side of Thomasville Road from Woodgate to Metropolitan Boulevard. And then based on the 5 years of crash data we reviewed, which is January 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2020, there were less than 1 bike/ped crashes per mile per year for that 5-year period. And that's based on the existing facilities along Thomasville Road, which includes, as you can see in the footnotes, the sidewalks for the entire length and bike lanes north of Waverly Road. It's also worth noting that the crash rate we use, the metric there is crashes per mile per year. For those of you that are familiar with safety analysis, that's usually done based on million vehicle miles traveled. But for the purpose of an easier understanding of how many crashes are occurring, we decided to use crashes per mile per year because DOT doesn't have a statewide average of bike ped crashes to be able to compare this to. It's also worth noting that these bike ped crashes are interactions between bicycles or pedestrians with vehicles. It's not a bicycle to a bicycle crash or a pedestrian, a person walking to another person. Okay, so for the local corridors we studied, Lafayette Street here in downtown Tallahassee, just right this way, has a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour with an average annual daily traffic, a daily volume of 9,300 vehicles. There are 21 driveway openings in the 0.89 mile segment, and there was less than one bike/ped crash per mile per year for that 5-year period. Along Franklin Boulevard, the posted speed limit is 30 miles per hour with an average annual daily traffic volume of 8,700 vehicles per day. There are 21 driveway openings in the 0.54 mile segment, and there were approximately 2 bike/ped crashes per mile per year for the 5-year data we reviewed. As you can see, the posted speed limits and the traffic volumes are not necessarily comparable to that along Thomasville Road. The speed limit along Thomasville Road is higher. The traffic on Thomasville Road is higher. With more driveway openings, the segment is longer. But we reviewed these two corridors because it gives a comparison of the users that will be using Thomasville Road. These are both here in Tallahassee. It'll be largely the same users or user types that'll be using the trail under evaluation. Also, DOT has begun to conduct non-motorized traffic counts around the state, and Franklin Boulevard is actually one of the places they've collected those counts. And for the year 2020, there were 65 non-motorized traffic counts per day. That's 65 bicycles or pedestrians per day for the year 2020. On a state level, we reviewed the Overseas Trail in Marathon, Florida, that's in the Keys, which has a posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour, an average annual daily traffic volume that varies between 12,800 vehicles per day and 29,900 vehicles per day. Again, that's just because there's multiple count locations along the segment we reviewed. There are 125 driveway openings in the 5.72 mile segment, and there were approximately 2 bicycle/pedestrian crashes per mile per year over the 5-year review period. For Cross Seminole Trail, which is on Reinhardt Road in Sanford, Florida, the posted speed limit again is 45 miles per hour. There's an annual average daily traffic volume that varies between 18,500 and 29,500 vehicles per day. There are 44 driveway openings in the 4.22 mile segment, and there was less than 1 bicycle/pedestrian crash per mile per year over the 5-year period. And then for Cortez Boulevard in Spring Hill, Florida, the posted speed limit again is 45 miles per hour. The annual average daily traffic volume varies between 27,500 and 40,500 vehicles per day. There are 62 driveway openings in the 5.84 mile segment we reviewed, and there was less than 1 bicycle/pedestrian crash per mile per year. As you can see, the speed limits and the posted speed limits and the daily traffic volumes, as well as the driveway openings and segment lengths. The segment lengths are a little longer than Thomasville Road, but these are all very comparable segments. They're in fairly built-up areas with residential land uses surrounding commercial land uses, business land uses, much like we have along Thomasville Road. And then lastly, the national corridors reviewed. So the first there is North Walton Boulevard in Bentonville, Arkansas, which has a 45 mile per hour posted speed limit and annual average daily traffic volume that varies between 25,500 and 30,000 vehicles per day. There are 52 driveway openings in the 1.48 mile segment reviewed, and there were approximately 2 bicycle/pedestrian crashes per mile per year for the 5-year period. For Falls of Neuse Road in Raleigh, North Carolina, The posted speed limit is 45 miles per hour. There's an annual average daily traffic volume that varies between 39,000 and 50,500 vehicles per day, with 46 driveway openings in the 3.13 mile segment, and there was less than one bicycle/pedestrian crash per mile per year for the 5-year review period. And then lastly, Dallas Road, which has a posted speed limit of 40 miles per hour and annual average daily traffic volume that's approximately 25,900 vehicles per day. There are 9 driveway openings in the 0.34 mile segment reviewed, and there were 2 bicycle/pedestrian crashes per mile per year. The Arkansas corridor and the North Carolina corridor, the top 2 there, again, those are very similar in surrounding land use and posted speed limit to that of Thomasville Road, as well as daily traffic volumes and segment lengths. The segment of Dallas Road that we reviewed is shorter than the Thomasville Road segment we reviewed. However, this gives a good comparison of what crash data looks like prior to the trail, as it can be noted that the Dallas Road Trail was constructed in 2020. So most of this bicycle/pedestrian crash data came prior to the trail. And so based on our review of the safety data along each of these corridors, there were less than 1 to 2 bicycle/pedestrian crashes per mile per year for the corridors we reviewed. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay Slaughterback.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So at the direction of the September board meeting, we wanted to provide you all with some crosswalk treatments and signage examples that could possibly work for the safety conditions on Thomasville Road. So we looked into doing crosswalks with the high visibility paint with the green, or potentially brick pavers to go with the aesthetic of the road, as you can see on the right for the Monticello Bike Trail. We also looked at signage opportunities. These include signage on both the trail and the cross roadway. This signage would typically put the burden on the trail users to stop before approaching the crosswalk, but it would also be expected of the motorists as well to look both ways, stop at the stop bar before proceeding through the crosswalk. We also looked at some trail user etiquette signs, and those would likely be part of the whole package. All would be MUTCD compliant, but keeping in mind that this is an FDOT roadway, there are some constraints based on costs for maintenance and construction. So with that, we will hand it back to Jack, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jeff?
So that finalizes the report from for safety and safety review in comparison. In the materials, there's a table that has a comparison of all these trails together, so you can take a look at all that information at one time. It would have been too big and you would not have been able to see it, put it up on the screen, but in the materials that are online, it's the last page of the PDF, so that's in there as well. So if you do have any questions, please ask, and we'll move forward from there.
Colleagues, any questions? Commissioner Reiner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to Kimley Horn for doing the report, really appreciate it, and to our CTPA staff for the effort, really appreciate it. A couple questions. I've had a constituent tell me that City Stormwater had met with CRTPA about the Benton to Post Road option. Can you give us an update on that? Because I've heard some information about the result of that meeting, but Jack, can you kind of shed some light on what the results of that meeting and where we go from here?
Sure. So we met with the underground utilities probably 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And so we discussed with them the design plans for the path, for the covered ditch. That's the McCord ditch, and it runs from Benton Road, I want to say 1,500 feet north, to the point, if you're familiar with the Benton Hills Nature Center, there's a point in there where they have like a little amphitheater kind of area. So that's about where the covered ditch ends. And those materials are also, you can see that online on the existing conditions report. So we met with them, and so what we're looking at is there is a path that's included in the covered ditch. And what we're assessing is whether that ditch can be augmented to meet the demands of what we're looking at in terms of a shared use path, which would be something that would be 8 to 10 feet wide. And so when we're still looking at that information, we want to make sure that we've kind of vetted all the information, and then when we're finished with this next round of public engagement, we'll release that information along with all the other things that we've got going on, because what we wanted to do was at the end of the CRTPA meeting is stop there with the data and keep collecting the data, but only move forward with the presentations for the public and our outreach, using that material because we didn't want to change the materials midway through that stream based on who we're meeting, homeowners associations and so forth. So that's kind of at a standstill, and we'll release all that other information once the public engagement is ended. And that, in terms of public engagement, in terms of public meetings, we have that meeting on November 4th, and that will be the end of the public meetings. But we'll continue to take public comments, and if people want to meet with us or neighborhood associations want to meet with us, we'll continue that all the way through to into January as necessary.
Thank you, Jack. So in other words, what you're saying is that with the start of this second wave of public input, you are purposely freezing all the options that are on the table while you're collecting the public input, correct?
Correct.
And that you might be collecting input that might be pros or cons against an option, but you're trying to keep the different options on the table static while you're going through the public input phase.
Correct.
Until public input is done. Is that
correct?
Because if you were to change those options midstream, you then create confusion with maybe the people you met at the beginning of the public input phase, and now you've got a different situation.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
And additionally, so as we move forward, what we're going to do is we're starting to hear a lot of the same questions coming up, about speed limits. Are we changing speed limits? What are we doing with the trees? What are we doing, what are the signage and all these other questions? And some of them, it's misinformation. So we want to correct that, at least from our perspective, and give some factual information about how we're moving forward and where we're at. And so on the web page from now on every day, I'm going to try to address one of those things at a time, so that as we start moving forward, that information should be out there. So hopefully there won't be as many questions for the board or for commissioners coming in about speed limits and trees and signage and those kind of things. So we'll start doing that on a daily basis so that that information can get out there as we're rolling forward.
That'd be great, Jack. Because as you can guess, we've heard from a lot of people.
Yes.
Regardless of what route is on the table that you all recommend, it touches on a lot of different neighborhoods and a lot of different constituents. And I think we know a lot of these people. I've talked with them, and a lot of people have very good intentions. They want to get the true picture of what we're dealing with and what we're looking at and evaluating their options. But there's also been some misinformation. I don't think it's deliberate, but I think there's misinformation about FDOT mandating asphalt for the route, right, and things like that. And so the more that we can kind of put everything out there and show people that I know this is going around, but this is not true, and instead these are the facts. That kind of helps clarify things, because I know it may be a simple project, but it's actually quite complicated in the nuance of what these different options are, and so that I think will be very helpful. Couple other questions. The safety review, the comparison, I think is very helpful, but just to clarify, the accident reports and the fatalities the accident reports are really just vehicular traffic interacting with bicyclists and pedestrians. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
That's correct.
So in other words, just so I understand the data, this data does not reflect crashes between bicyclists and pedestrians only. Is that correct? Okay. I know that, because I'm sure the public is going to be interested in maybe trying to understand a little bit more about that, because one thing that we've heard from much of the public is the bidirectional nature of the path, bicyclists and pedestrians. One thing we've heard quite a bit about is, people some folks who might be elderly walking down the path with bicyclists going in the opposite direction. Jack, do you or does Kimberly Horn have any sense? I know you don't have the hard numbers in the report, but any sense of the prevalence of that type of crash or collision?
Sure. So if you all recall back in June, we had gone through the process and probably spent 4 to 5 months looking at safety components, vehicle crashes with pedestrians and bicyclists. And in that data, there is information regarding bicycle and pedestrian crashes. In all of the 700 or 800 records that I reviewed for fatalities and fatal injuries, there was one crash that had pedestrian and bicycles engaging each other. And it was nowhere near Thomasville Road. It was on Tennessee Street. So those interactions just aren't there that we see. It could be a minor injury, but that's not reported, because we hear people say all the time that, I almost, or it was a near miss, or it was this. Those aren't typically reported, so we don't know that information. And as long as it's not reported, we can't get that information. So, and again, from a safety perspective, we have over 900 records, and we have one crash like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you. And then the last question, at least for this, for now, is the safety data goes. I mean, it's basically 5 years. Actually, it's 2 questions. 5 years of data, but you basically use 2019 data instead of 2020 because of the pandemic, and you didn't want the pandemic numbers to skew the rest of the analysis. Is that correct? So my question is. I think for each one of these comparisons, you chose not to use the 2020 data, but instead 2019. But then that only gives you 4 years of data.
We reviewed all of 2016 to all of 2020 to the end of 2020. So we had all 5 years worth of data reviewed for each of those years.
Okay. So you did use the 2020 data.
Yes. During
the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I misunderstood that. I guess the last question I have is, and you mentioned this for Dallas Road in Texas,
mm-hmm.
but can you give us a sense for, as much as you can, on these comparisons, the delta, the before and the after? So, what type of crash data do we have before the trail, the multi-use path was put into place, and then once the multi-use path was put in? Because I think that's what a lot of people here are concerned about. I mean, we have a sense for what the existing sidewalks are, but I hear a lot of concern about if there's increased bandwidth, if there's increased traffic along the multi-use path, because it's widened, there are concerns about the safety of that. With heavy use, we might get more collisions and incidents. Can you speak to that a bit? I know you probably aren't able to reflect it in the report, but when you had a multi-use path established, like with Dallas Road in 2020, did things get safer, or was with the increased use leading to more accidents?
Yeah, I personally can't speak to that. Aside from Dallas Road, all of the trails all the corridors we reviewed the trails were constructed sometime around 2000 or even before 2010 for, I think, 1 or 2.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If I could follow up on that too, keep in mind the signal forward data, that's the system we use to pull the traffic count, or traffic crash data, only goes back to 2011 or 2012, I believe. So we actually, anything that was built, in essence, prior to 2012, 2013, we would not be able to get previous crash data prior to 2011, 2012. Okay. And most all of these were built probably in a time frame that we wouldn't be able to pull that data from.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Minor. Any other comments on this item? Okay, I'll weigh in a little bit. Reviewing the safety analysis from everything I've seen, it's hard for me where I am now to support the trail going just straight up Thomasville Road. When we look at some of the comparisons, and I, took time and went on Google Maps and looked at each comparison, and there's a lot of safety features that were planned in with the bike route. There's some of the roadways had right-hand turn lanes, which would allow traffic to get out of moving traffic while it waited for a pedestrian or a bike to pass. Some of the comparisons had a larger gap between the roadway and the trail, and I just want to make sure, as we're planning, we're not making a situation where we're going to make Thomasville Road more dangerous. And looking at the marathon comparison, where they saw 4 fatalities, and I think it was over 5 years, and had quite a bit more car-pedestrian interactions than Thomasville Road currently does. My concern is, are we going down a direction where we're actually going to make it more dangerous, encourage people to be on Thomasville Road, and make it more dangerous? I do think looking at alternative pathways from that north to south corridor and getting off of Thomasville Road, if we move forward, would be the best move going forward, because I don't want to create a path, have more people go on it, and then start seeing people die in the first 5 years without really holistically planning Thomasville Road. So when people, ask about the speed limits, I don't think we should be building pedestrian facilities right next to a 45-mile-per-hour highway. If we're going to do it, I think we need to be all in. We need to slow traffic down. We need to design the roadway to accommodate a shared use between motor vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. So that's my largest concern, because I know the focus is getting the bike trail there, but I think we have to look at the largest scope of safety and what we want that corridor to be. If that corridor is going to continue to just be a highway to get people to the suburbs, I think that serves a purpose. But if we're going to change how people interact with that roadway, I think we do need to dig into some of those considerations of separation from the roadway and turn lanes and those sorts of things. I know we have several options on the table, and we'll be taking it up in January, but I just wanted to put my feelings out there. Any other comments on this item?
Just, Mr. Chairman, just real quick for an update. Our plan right now, as Jack said, our last scheduled public meeting is November the 4th, but we'll continue to meet with interested parties or homeowners associations after that. The timeline right now is to get the recommendations out, published on the website, the first or second week in December, I believe. And then that way, that gives everyone a chance to review them, plenty of time to review them before the meetings, the committee meetings in early January and the board meeting in mid-January.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Manning?
Greg, thank you very much for mentioning that. That's one point I want to make sure that we clarified here, because I want to make sure that once the recommendation from staff was presented, along with all the data you've collected during the public input phase, I want to make sure that the public has ample time to review that before we go into our next CRTPA meeting in January to vote. So that's great. I think that timeline is great. That gives us roughly a month, I think,
Yes, sir.
for us as CRTPA members, as well as the public, to take a look at what staff's produced, talk with the public, and then come in January with our final results. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. That's important.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so that
Mr.
brings us
Chair,
on. Commissioner
one other
Wilbur.
thing. Greg, I wanted to make sure that we're clear on that, because I have a meeting scheduled for this afternoon with some constituents from the Benton Hills neighborhood. And if there is no hurry, or if there is more information that will be provided, they may or may not want to meet now. They may want to wait until they have an opportunity to see and review that information. So I want to share that with them. Of course, I'm happy to meet with them, but I don't know what else I have to share other than to listen because of what's been discussed here today. So I just wanted to mention that, so in case anyone is here from Benton Hills, or if anyone is listening or watching, the developments this morning, sounds like there'll be time to address these issues long before a final decision is made. So I wanted to just say that in case any of them are here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I hear the train behind us, so I think that segues us into the rail discussion. Mr. Clay?
Yeah, we did that on purpose. Actually, I received an email from Ricky Fitzgerald earlier this morning. He is actually ill today. So I've asked him if he would to come to our November meeting to give you all the presentation. I know Mr. Williams Cox, he had brought this up a few months ago. So if the board's okay with that, we will postpone this item until our regular November board meeting and have Ricky come and give the presentation on the rail operations or the rail work that DOT is doing right now.
And Mr. Chair, in regards to that, I know that the county has had some conversation about the rails, and the reason I know that is not because I'm stalking y'all, but because I have constituents who sent me a picture of you all discussing it and wanted to make sure that it sounds like the train is coming.
Yeah.
And so in case they're watching, I wanted to make sure they understood that we were scheduled for a presentation this morning, but it will happen at our November board meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to be loud and clear on that.
All right, so we will just move on to the next item, since we have a little extra time here, and do the FDOT setting the stage.
The next item is the break.
Well, we'll stick to the schedule. We'll take a break at 10:15
No,
quickly.
I'm just messing with you. Just got started.
FDOT setting the stage.
Everyone, I'd like to introduce Allison Stetner, Director of the Office of Policy Planning for DOT. Alice and I have known each other a long time. Actually, when we first met, I had a lot less gray hair than I do now, so that'll give you an idea of how long we've known each other. But Allison gave this presentation to our MPOAC board earlier this year, and I thought it was some interesting information that you all should hear about, and just looking at kind of some of the long-term thinking from DOT Central Office. So, well, Allison, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to really talk about some of the trends that are impacting our policy decisions. And this has been updated since the last time I presented it to Greg, so it's got the latest and greatest information in it. Just to let you kind of set the stage, and that's what we typically call this presentation as we go into our programming, we really want to reflect on what the policy implications of how we align our resources better. So we're going to start with talking about a little bit about what's going on in Washington. So we know that there's a new infrastructure bill that's pending, and we're hopeful that it will pass. It'll be a good influx of new transportation funding and a lot of discretionary programs into our work program, and it'll change a little bit about the way we do business, and it'll impact the MPO's business as well. With that, I want to just talk about some of the key emphasis areas in the new policy. Of course, safety continues to be the #1 priority. There'll be an increased emphasis on looking at safety and trying to achieve our target of 0, moving into continuing our approach to increase job creation. The transportation industry continues to be a high-performing, high-paying opportunity for employment. Equity, and looking at trying to enhance equitable outcomes in our transportation decisions, changing that conversation to be more inclusive, and looking at some of our policies to align transportation infrastructure so that all communities advance. And then obviously resilience continues to be a very important topic as we move forward. We know that we've seen some changes in our policy and the way we have to look at a resilient community overall, looking at all the aspects that relate to resilience, not just transportation infrastructure, and it's a more holistic approach. And then future of funding, we know that we have a heavy reliance on fuel tax, and that we know is waning, and even though we have an influx of stimulus right now, it's not a long-term solution to our transportation financial problems. So just moving on a little bit to how Florida is changing, we see that we have continued to have high growth rates. We're blessed with a great weather, great tax structure, and we're seeing some changes to the population, and that's beginning to impact the way we do business, and our funding and alignment of funding needs to address some of these growing impacts. With that, we have seen a rebound in the economy over the last year. It's been feast and famine and up and downs, a little bit of a roller coaster as we move forward. And as you can see, we had a big swing in unemployment rate when we shut down and sheltered in place, but that is rebounding now, and our unemployment rate has dropped back to lows, and we're kind of seeing that issue with trying to get more people to the workforce. We're seeing workforce shortages now, and so those are some of the indicators where before we had high unemployment and now suddenly we have workforce shortages. We just can't find that middle ground, but we're continuing to work that. And you can see from this slide also that our visitors were heavily influenced by our visitor travel in our economy, and we can see that it's rebounded, but the visitors aren't coming from the same place. It's more national-based travel, so people are driving into Florida to soak in our great weather and our kind of open business climate right now. But the impacts are really uneven across the community, and transportation remains the 3rd highest household cost for most families. And we can see that we participate in the Asset Limited Income Constrained While Employed ALICE survey, and we can see that 46% of households in Florida are considered incomes constrained. This means they're operating paycheck to paycheck, so disruptions in their financial can really have a severe impact on the family. 60% of Floridians work hourly, and work under $20 per hour. So transportation costs and infrastructure and the economy are really related to having this not this full-time employment sector that many of us are blessed to have. I want to talk a little bit about visitor and non-farm employment. That's how we really look at it. You can see based on this slide that the 21 forecast versus the December forecast, we're still not keeping up with the employment where we had anticipated. So this continues to be a concern as we're looking at how we provide access to jobs and opportunity. But our visitor travel is back up, and again, that just kind of shows that we are seeing that rebound where we have a heavy tourist industry. Our risks are changing. So we have, obviously, we are familiar with the climate and weather risks and the need for evacuation. We're having more extreme weather events. We have higher incidence of coastal and inland flooding. We have sea level rise impacts, and we have extreme heat. Those all need to be treated differently. We have to make sure we get people out of harm's way. And as we continue to develop our coastal areas, 60% of Floridians live along the coast in one of these areas. And it's a concern to make sure that we can keep people safe and make sure our transportation infrastructure is hardened and resilient enough to make sure that we can recover from those type of incidences. This year, we learned a lot about how to respond to pandemics and public health emergencies, so we'll be better prepared for those in the future. Supply chain disruptions, we continue to see those now. I read recently in one of well, I think the Washington Post, that if you don't do your Christmas shopping now, you might not be able to get your packages delivered on time. So if you're planning on doing e-commerce this year, you might want to consider speeding up your Christmas shopping. And then, of course, cybersecurity. I think we were all kind of impacted by the Colonial Pipeline. This is going to be a continued threat. We have threats to our cybersecurity and our networks at all times, whether more and more things are going online, and you're going to see more and more attacks going on. So what are the policy implications for this type of issues that are affecting our economy? Planning is more uncertain now than it ever has been in the past. You can't just rely on the same trend lines. You have to really have redundancy in your plan so that you can rebound more quickly from different types of disruptions to our planning processes. We're integrating risk into resiliency into all of our planning and procedures. We have to continue to support job creation and economic stimulus, with the transportation infrastructure being one of the major contributors to Florida's economy, and then improving equity and access to opportunity. A little bit about safety. Safety continues to be the department's #1 priority. And as you can see, even though we've had a drop, that yellow line is the drop in VMT that we saw during the pandemic, and it continues to be a little bit lower, these numbers will rebound. But we haven't really seen that impact in our fatalities. We have seen a drop in the serious injuries in the state. We think that is related to having safer vehicles, not better driver behavior or safer infrastructure. But we have seen an increase in fatalities. And because there's less congestion on the road, we're seeing extreme speeds on our facilities, so speed management is going to be a key component to the department and to how we address some of these fatalities moving forward. So I just mentioned that speed management. You'll see some new guidance from the department on speed management. It's going to be very important to how we manage risk on our highways and roadways. We're going to look at work zones. Work zone safety is one of the emphasis areas that is continuing to emerge. Look at how we can better address our equity impacts and have better equitable outcomes. Keep looking at alternatives to driving. If we can get more people out of their single occupancy vehicle and onto transit or in other modes, it takes out some of that risk, and we will be a lot safer. So if you're on a transit vehicle, you're safer, inherently safer than when you're in your single occupancy vehicle. And then looking at our priority and the flexibility of funding to address safety projects. Safety is already embedded into all of our processes, but kind of looking more closely to make sure we're putting the right countermeasures in the right place. Some of our countermeasures, such as if you're in a lane departure vehicle, we add more clear zone, but that might trick the human mind to actually go faster on those facilities. So we have to make sure that our countermeasures are balanced with the right context of the facility and better address the actual crash statistics that we're seeing on the facility. And there's a few emerging trends in safety that we're working to address with better data, such as micromobility, safety, some of those near misses that you talked about earlier. How can we better use AI and machine learning to capture those with our camera network that's out there on our facilities so that we can better address countermeasures to kind of reduce the risk for those near misses that we're not seeing in the crash reports. So a little bit touching on mobility and how we can enhance mobility. So we talked a little bit about the recent trends in mobility, and here in the green line you see the 2019 the volumes that we had on our freeway traffic. And then in 2020 you saw this drop. But when you look at 2021, you see that the traffic is completely rebounded and is now above the 2019 levels. So the long-term trends see that VMT continues to outpace our population growth. So more people are driving more places more of the time. So we want to make sure that when we look at how our visitor and our population uses our facilities, that we're keeping them safe and that we have the infrastructure available for them to have more opportunities for different options. So the implications to the policy from the department is looking more holistically at corridor planning to make sure that it's inclusive and complete for all modes. Rethinking transit and shared mobility to increase funding shares to those modes, to shift people from single occupancy vehicle and to maximize our corridors, and providing choices that connect jobs to services. So a little bit about how the department looks at innovation. We know that technology is rapidly changing, and we need ways to improve the way that we embrace technology in the department and throughout all of our features. It's hard to invest in innovation because you don't know how it's going to scale statewide. So when we're looking at ways that we can implement small scaled projects so that they can move up and be implemented statewide without investing fully, we have changing vehicles. We have a greater penetration in electric vehicles. We have major manufacturers committing to end the internal combustion engine. We call it the end of the ice age. We're going to be all EV within the next 20 to 30 years. What does that do to our funding? A lot of unknown questions. What about the EV charging infrastructure? How is that going to impact our resilience and being able to evacuate? So a lot of considerations going on with EV. And you can see kind of the adoption rates and the penetrations by 2040. Even if you're on the moderate, with that 20%, you'll see a big change in the way that people are using our facilities. And then we are seeing some changes and trends in teleworking and people working remotely. This is going to change how we do business travel. We're already going to see these numbers are from 2020, but they're not going to go back to the original 5%. More and more companies and organizations are adopting permanent telework policies. We'll see different characteristics and movement on the road. It's changing the way that origin and destinations work. It's changing the way people are living in their communities, looking for more space. Might move out if you could live out in the country and have a more affordable housing type and commute into a downtown only a couple days a week. You might make that choice, and we're seeing that in our land use trends in our bigger urbanized areas. And then broadband, we still have gaps in our broadband in our rural areas. So, and there's an equity issue when we talk about connectivity in our for broadband. If we're relying more on telework options, we need to make sure that we're creating infrastructure to have better connectivity that's affordable and available to all. So, lots of policy implications to how we address the emerging technologies and how we advance proven and emerging mobility solutions, supporting how the department supports broadband connectivity, how we look at and address electric vehicle infrastructure, and of course throughout that all is that more things are based in the cloud and more things are vulnerable to cybersecurity and data privacy, and ensuring that our workforce is better capable and able to handle the new influx of big data and how we analyze things in real time are all going to be challenges moving forward. So no conversation on transportation is complete without talking about the funding crisis that we are experiencing or will soon experience. We know that fuel taxes are capped out. We're not going to see new revenue from that. We've already peaked, and after that, we're going to start declining on the basis of our revenue stream. But transportation projects and transportation infrastructure is not getting cheaper. So we're hopeful that federal stimulus and the reauthorization, and there'll be an increase in discretionary grants. So there's a lot happening at the federal level right now. We had the American Rescue Plan Act, we had CRISA, we have the stimulus, the reauthorization in the, hopefully it'll have a new acronym soon, but the IJA. So there's a lot going on up there, and we're hopeful that we'll have this reauthorization. But with that, and even though we'll still get 90% of the funding by formula, there's a huge increase in federal discretionary programs to look at some of these targeted type opportunities. And those are going to rely a lot on partnerships with all of you and our communities going forward, because the department isn't competitive for many of these programs due to the size of our budget. So the department will be looking for partners to help advance some of these discretionary programs. So we know that there's a lot of emphasis on looking for an alternative to the motor fuel tax, and so that we can have a sustainable and reliable funding stream for the future. And the new bill does look at pilots for that, and we have several states that we're following right now that are looking at pilots to look at VMT or other types of alternatives to fuel tax. State and local partnerships are going to be key to moving forward. Some of the infrastructure isn't going to be completed. We have to take a more network approach to solutions so that we're putting the right facilities for the right mode in the right place, and right-sizing our infrastructure to focus on full mobility rather than throughput. And then we need to be flexible and agile in our funding. So if we looking at where we're moving, some of our projects started a long time ago. It takes a really long time to make a project go from concept to concrete to full operation. And those projects that were identified many years ago might not be the solution we need today. So going back and taking a close look at our projects overall and making sure that we're putting the right project in the right place for the right context. And with that, I just want to remind everyone that safety is everybody's responsibility. The department has adopted the Safe System approach, and to learn more, there's 2 very compelling Transplex series left in this month on the Safe System approach, and we have one of these modules, the Safe Roads, Safe Vehicles, Safe Speeds, and Safe Systems and post-crash care that will be talked about in the next couple weeks. And they're all available online if you want to catch up and you haven't seen any of the other 3 to date. And I'll take any questions or comments.
Sure. Thank you, Allison. Commissioner Barfield?
Thank you very much. The Florida Department of Transportation is best friends with Jefferson County, and we love every one of you. Y'all have always been good to us.
I don't hear that very often, so I'll take it.
Leon County loves you very much as well.
We love
It's like
them
the
more.
best FPO meeting ever.
I do want to ask you, Allison, about your supporting your broadband connectivity policy. We are struggling in Jefferson County. We do have monies to lay down fiber, and it is the last end user portion that we're having the most difficult part with. You could lay down anybody lays down fiber, but I want to hear what your policy is now and moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. DEO is taking the lead from the state on creating a broadband master plan, right? Well, the Department of Transportation, with our network of great facilities, has an opportunity to connect and create a system that is really statewide. And that's how we are providing that support. We are laying fiber in all of our facilities so that we can really ensure that we can get out to the connectivity. But still, service is spotty. And we know that. And so, but our structures and our facilities can be used to expand the connectivity. And we know that by providing those right-of-way, enhancing permitting, we can really help get the connectivity better. We got a long way to go.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I thought about is as we're widening Waukena Highway here, starting your next fiscal year, is how can we lay fiber as we widen and improve the safety of these rural roads? It just seems like that would be one area that FDOT would take a look at and partner with DEO and lay that fiber down, because you have your equipment there, you're mobilized, and it just seems like that would just save a bundle of money at that time.
Yeah, so we, because of the length of our projects, we look at that type of IT type approach later in the project. As if we start in PD&E, it's consideration, but you really need to be putting out technology closer to the construction. And so with our facilities, we typically put in fiber automatically, and I don't know precisely about that project because I'm not at the project level anymore. But in putting that in is not only important to the department so that we can have better connection to our own technology out there, but reaching out to the community and providing those connections. So specifically on that project, I'll have to look at the specs to make sure, see what's going in. But it is our process to include fiber in our major corridors.
Yeah, and I think too, just to expand on that, what Commissioner Barfield is referring to is actually a resurfacing project. And what Allison, when she talks about their corridors, typically they look to put conduit for fiber in their capacity expansion, new construction, or 2 lanes to 4 lanes. You typically don't do that type of work on a resurfacing project.
We can change that.
Oh yeah, sure.
And
I just wanted to clarify that point.
we are discussing it now because if we're going to create new technology, enhance our safety outcomes, we are going to be leveraging more and more technology solutions to get more efficiencies in our facilities. So it is in discussions on our resurfacing program.
All right, you send that back to...
I'll send it back, definitely.
Up there to Secretary Gaynor, we asked about it, okay?
Excellent, I will.
Thank you, Commissioner. Dr. V, followed by Commissioner Richardson, followed by Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stetner, I am going to, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I am going to pitch some of Gaston County. By the way, Gaston County also loves the FDOT.
Great, I will come back anytime.
Okay, and there are some Gaston County pressing safety needs that I have been talking about, and I'm going to maybe at another point again today reiterate those needs. One is we need a traffic light or a caution light at the intersection of County Road, State Road 12 and Point Milligan in the St. Hebron, St. Matthew community, which is in Quincy. That we need that very badly. And then we need crosswalks on Pat Thomas Parkway, crossing from the Walgreen to the Captain D's restaurant. And then one is down on the Parkway, crossing from Walmart to the National Guard Armory. Those are very, very unsafe crossings, since most of the residents there have to walk down the sidewalk and then cross the road. And the third will be a turning lane on Highway 27, turning from 27, coming from Tallahassee onto Gibson Sawmill Road. There have been a lot of closures. As a matter of fact, last week a tractor trailer has to jackknife because a car turning on that particular turn pulled onto the road, and the tractor trailer has to swerve and ended up jackknifing. So if FDOT will seriously, I mean seriously, I have been pitching and crying for these unsafe area in Gaston County, and I hope now you will take, FDOT will take that into serious consideration, and since safety is everyone's responsibility, I will suggest that we all be responsible for the safety of our citizens. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Mr.
you for
Chair.
those comments. I jotted them down. I'll work with District 3 to and make sure that we're looking at those intersections and those crossings.
Thank you, ma'am.
Commissioner Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. One is, when I left the legislature in 2008, we were beginning the discussion about alternative funding for transportation infrastructure. Where are we at this point?
Same place we were in 2008. You should have stayed.
Isn't that molasses?
We haven't made much progress.
Haven't been
on
able
the
to figure it out
alternative fuels. No, not quite yet.
Okay.
The conversation is still important, and you'll see in committee meetings in this last couple weeks that they're talking about the impacts, but we haven't seen much further discussion other than talk.
Okay. Well, two things. One is we're still planning transportation infrastructure based on today's model, for instance. We have approved funding for the 6-laning of Capitol Circle Southwest. And I guess, kind of based on what you presented here this morning, that may be an outdated model.
I think that is an excellent point. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're right. The data is changing very quickly, and we still have to rely on some of the methodologies that we've always used, and that does not really create an agile system that is more reactive. And are we overbuilding in areas where technology may be forthcoming that will enhance the efficiency of those facilities? So our approaches have changed to add more of the operational analysis, what we call the TISMO type of approach, into our analysis, and looking at facilities to see if we can enhance safety, efficiency, and mobility, because sometimes those are contrary, but we have to balance all of those various needs with the overall network of the facility. And then not looking at a single facility by itself, but how it operates completely within a system of roadways. So the state only has 10% of all of the road network in the state, and that means the rest of the infrastructure is owned and maintained by others, like you in your counties and cities. So how we work together to really enhance overall mobility is essential, and looking at new ways to leverage big data and decision making that make sure that we're putting the right improvement in the right place to maximize the benefits and the goals of the community is key to our success. And sometimes that has to be looked at midstream.
Right. The other issue is, I think there was a story on 60 Minutes the other night about the autonomous tractor trailers now, autonomous vehicle tractor trailers, because they can't find truck drivers anymore. And of course, we're starting to see the increase in autonomous vehicles. Is the transportation infrastructure being developed to accommodate?
It is.
That?
And that's a great point. And we have autonomous vehicles already operating in Florida, especially in the freight industry. About 5 years ago, we did a test on the Turnpike for truck platooning using autonomous vehicle and driver-assisted platooning technology to maximize those efficiencies. That checked the requirement for our pilot in the state of Florida that'll open the door for autonomous vehicle usage, still with a human in the car to maintain control and awareness of the facility so that autonomous vehicles can move forward. We have an autonomous vehicle master plan as part of our ACES program, which stands for Autonomous Connected Electric and Shared Vehicles, as we look at how we apply technology to make those vehicle-to-infrastructure, vehicle-to-vehicle communications more important, so that we can really maximize the network through technology usage.
Okay. And then finally, and this I'm sure hits home for our rural partners, cities like Tallahassee are an economic hub in this region, and many of the residents from the surrounding rural areas come into Tallahassee to work, to shop, to recreate. How are we going to plan then for those rural counties to be able to get people out of those cars if they're coming into the economic hubs, if you will? Because that's the transportation that they're continuing to use now. And they may not have the funding for going to alternative methods of transportation.
Yeah, I think like with everything, all of the impacts when you have a market-driven system, how we support that from the state is by applying infrastructure solutions that allow everyone to have options to move. So we know that these impacts are going to be uneven. We know that we have some freight considerations in our rural facilities. Senate Bill 100, when they repealed MCORs, took a closer look at rural connectivity and how we look at freight movements that are going through centers of rural centers and maintaining and keeping cohesive rural communities that are gems in the state. So as we move forward, we want to really think about how the system works overall, what those freight movements are, that connectivity, how do we provide more choices in our rural areas, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, which is difficult for the department because we like standard procedures. Right. But it's not as easy as saying this population has these characteristics and needs this types of opportunities to be successful, and this is how the department can help deploy the right technology and the right infrastructure in the right place.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Williams-Cox, followed by Director Slay.
Okay, thank you. 2 points. As I'm riding around, I'm asking these questions of myself, and I just want to put it in the air. We're supposed to be reducing our carbon footprint, and we're trying to get people out of cars, but I see more and more car washes being built. So my question is, are we really trying to get out of cars? Really, is that really our goal? And if so, what are we going to do with all these car washes? So that's not that. I want y'all to ponder that. I wanted to ask seriously a question about the, and we may be getting an update on this, the super loop that's planned for the Crawfordville Highway, Woodville Highway, that area down there. I don't know if that's something that you would be able to provide an update on, or
I can't provide an update on that, but someone from the district probably can.
I was going to say, just real quickly, it's still in right-of-way acquisition, but there's no construction funded program, no construction program currently at this point. So it's not funded for construction.
It's not funded for construction?
No, ma'am.
Okay. We, for a while there, we were hearing from a lot of folks down that way not wanting it. Do they know that we are not funded for construction yet?
Yes, ma'am. It's when we went through that a couple of years ago, it was not funded at that time either. So that, from that perspective, that part has not changed. It is still not funded for construction.
Okay. All right. I've just kind of lost sight, but for a while we had folks coming regularly about that. And as I'm thinking about Thomasville Road and the public engagement that we're having there for changes that may be occurring that the residents are having concern about, just want to make sure that we keep those folks informed as well of what's going on the south end. And the other part of that too is that part of that is a part of the city and the county's Southside Action Plan, so we want to make sure we're working in concert with that as well. So those were my thoughts as we were talking about future transportation issues and the ones that FDOT is involved in. And I'm surprised Commissioner Richardson didn't mention Orange Avenue.
I understand there's supposed to be a presentation about that.
Oh, okay. I was wondering why I hadn't. Okay. All right. Thank you. So my question was for the group.
Director Slay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context, and it was interesting when Commissioner Richardson brought up the fact that when he left the legislature in 2008, they were talking about it. So that's 13 years ago, and nothing's really happened. With the announcement Allison mentioned earlier, but I know Chevrolet and a couple of other manufacturers said by 2035 they're going to be all electric. We're basically, about 14 years away from that, and I think that's probably one of the most pressing issues we have, especially at the state level, is the fact that there has been no movement on how we're going to fund the transportation system. You know, in the government world, 14 years is next week practically. So I am hoping that we'll start to see some movement by the legislature on that particular issue. But, you know, keep in mind, and this goes back to, I think, some conversations you all were having here a few years ago before I got here, there's still a lot of concern about, you know, especially with the VMT folks being tracked and things like that. But fundamentally, you know, that particular issue in the transportation world, it will have a devastating effect if we can't move something forward to maintain that funding stream for our transportation system.
Yeah, it's all the major manufacturers. GM by 2035, Ford, and all of the Volvo group by 2040. So that is the majority of our fleet.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Saleh. And I wanted to weigh in a little bit on what Commissioner Richardson was talking about, and, you know, this path of continuing to expand lane capacity. And, you know, we talk about the concept of induced demand. As we build more lanes, more people use them. I told Director Slay we would gladly start our meetings at 9:30 or 10 if we want to reduce the demand during rush hour of our meetings. But I did want to ask, you were talking about electric vehicles in the future, and I think, you know, largely we look at transit or mass transit as probably the only real solution to reduce congestion. Do you see a change of focus as we grow? A lot of times when we talk about transit, we talk about, you know, the ridership locally, how many people will adopt it, and we also know, unless it's coming very consistently at different intervals, people likely will choose the car if that's the more convenient option. But could you speak to how do we jump the gap from where we are in the vehicle dependencies to getting to transit without intentionally doing it, even if the ridership's not there yet?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and it's one that transportation planners for decades have been grappling with. When we think about providing choice and the market-driven economy and people's preferences and how society chooses where they live, work, and play and the choices they have, we think the best option is to create frictionless travel choices where it's seamless to go from mode to mode. And the easier it is to transfer, to get onto a reliable transportation system, whether that's transit or shared or taking a bike ride or using micromobility for a portion of your trip, that will provide more options overall. And if it becomes easier to use these options altogether, then people will start using them more frequently. Right now, it's really easy to jump in your car, you have your stuff, you can go pretty much anywhere you want. And so that simplicity of an auto trip makes it much more compelling to choice users, right? So, but we have to make the rest of the trips more seamless if we're going to actually advance more mobility in our system.
Great, thank you. Were there any other questions for Allison? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for letting me wonk out today, talk about such trends in our system. It's a pleasure to be here.
And,
Thank you,
and we all love you.
Just remember what I said.
Okay. There you go.
And just remember that our regular FDOT District 3 rep is here. I'm sure he wants y'all to share some of that love with him. He's sitting back there taking it all in, so make
Yes,
sure.
Brian, we love you too.
You should be at the table. Are you coming to the table?
Y'all gave out all
Okay.
the love.
So we're a little ahead of schedule. We had a planned break at 10:15. Would you like to take it, or should we keep moving forward?
Yes.
Great.
Well, we've got one of our speakers is not here yet, so I'd suggest.
Okay, one of our speakers isn't here yet, so let's just take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes.
That was a good try, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And welcome back to the second half of our CRTPA retreat. We are moving along on the agenda, so we are at the Star Metro discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to hear a presentation today related to the Star Metro's TDP and Comprehensive Operations Analysis. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Rosser for introductions.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to introduce Andrea Ostradka with our tool design, our design consultant, working also with Nelson Nygaard on this program. She's going to give you an overview of our TDP that we submitted to DOT earlier this year. It was accepted. And also our COA, Comprehensive Operational Analysis, where we are and where we're going to be going moving forward. So,
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Great. One moment.
We have temporarily misplaced our IT support, so Greg went to look for it. Sorry about that, Andrea. Everybody's getting this right as she's going through it.
Oh, I got it. Yeah. A little quicker if you could.
Where did you?
That's as far as I can go.
Yeah, let's see.
Should we pause, or would you like me to keep going? I think the
Yeah, we'll take a minute and see if they can get
Okay.
it.
Everything here is Leon County. Leon County, Tallahassee. Big dogs.
Hey, I looked out for you. I tried to look at it. You know, I do. Yeah, that's my second home.
Yeah, but my girl here, she wanna take her home. So he on my side, and she on my side.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm not sure I did all I could.
Okay.
I think this is what we call dead time in the TV world.
Can you proceed without the slides? you
I
think?
certainly can.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So as Andrea mentioned, I'm here today to give you an update on the Star Metro Transit Development Plan and Comprehensive Operational Analysis. The Transit Development Plan is a longer-term vision plan where we focus on the system. This is something that we recently completed and submitted to FDOT. And the Comprehensive Operational Analysis is a more short-term tactical plan that we look for things that we can implement today or in the short term to improve service. The COA is particularly important. We're right in the middle of it right now. With the pandemic, we've seen changes in commute patterns and in ridership patterns no matter what mode people are using. And so we're trying to be real thoughtful about how we build back after COVID. So with the, starting with the Transit Development Plan, it is a 10-year needs-based plan. So when we look at this, we look at the entire community and what sorts of services, what sorts of infrastructure, what sorts of technology and policies are going to support transit mobility needs in this community over the next 10 years. It is a required plan to receive state block grant funding. Star Metro does a major update to its transit development plan every 5 years. And each year in the interim, it does a minor update, just looking at what sorts of projects have been implemented and what's left to go. We submitted the Transit Development Plan to FDOT before its due date on September 1st and have received approval from FDOT. So that one is all set. When we looked at what sorts of improvements might be needed, we looked at things like maintaining existing service, so sort of a neutral option. We also looked at increasing frequency on certain routes, adding more Saturday and Sunday service, increasing span of service, so earlier in the morning, later in the evening. We also looked at infrastructure improvements that might support community needs more. When we created a list of all of these alternative improvements for service, we evaluated them against 7 categories. These categories include economic development, the impact on the poverty score, organizational effectiveness, public infrastructure, public safety, public trust, and its ability to just improve quality of life overall. The comprehensive operational analysis is the part of this project that we're right in the middle of now. We've just completed a, sorry.
Yep. I think they're trying to get it pulled up
Okay.
there now, so if you can.
All right. We have just completed a round of public engagement for the comprehensive operational analysis. This included several meetings that we held within the community, as well as surveys. We met with writers, we met with other stakeholders, we asked them what was meeting their needs today, what they wanted to see in the future, what would make it easier for them to connect to essential services, employment opportunities, educational opportunities, and of course, connecting to each other. This is something that we do with all of our projects and is particularly informative as we start to prioritize what improvements to make. So we did onboard surveys as well. This started at the end of September. We were on the buses. We were also at major bus stops and transfer stations within the community. This really helps us understand the whole trip, so where people are starting, where they're ending. You hear a lot about those first and last mile connections. So how far does someone need to walk or ride their bike or get a ride just to get to the nearest bus stop? And then how far are they going once they get off the bus to reach their place of work or school or the grocery store, for example? So we got a lot of great feedback here. We've been working to combine that feedback with the data that we have from onboard the vehicles, the automatic passenger counts. We've been looking at average boardings and alightings. Alightings are when people get off the bus. We've been looking at information for each route, each stop, and then whole trips. So we are trying to understand if people are able to get where they're trying to go with one trip, or if they actually have to transfer once or twice, take 2 or more buses to get to their final destination. Now's the fun part. We're right in the middle of these route evaluations. We're creating an online dashboard so that you can see each route and its metrics. So how many people are using those bus stops, if service is busier in the morning or at night or the middle of the day. These are things that will help inform the whole recommendation process. This is something that will go on for the next 2 or 3 weeks. We should have our results early in November. Generally speaking, though, I can say that we've seen some challenges with on-time performance, so I imagine that some of our recommendations will be related to improving on-time performance. We've also seen where the system is the strongest. The Azalea and Big Bend routes follow major arterials to the east-west and north-south. Those are really what we consider the backbone of the Star Metro system. And then there are other routes that support it. Some routes are not so direct in their design, but they are serving communities that need the service quite intensely. So these are communities that may have 1 or 0 car households predominating. They may be lower income communities. They may be communities that just for various demographic reasons have higher transit ridership. So as I mentioned, we are in the middle of this process. We kicked off the comprehensive operational analysis in June. We are going to be moving forward with a work session with Star Metro staff, hopefully in December, and then some public meetings right after the new year. And then we'll be finishing up our analysis in February, hoping to come back to report the conclusions in March. So in terms of what you should expect from the COA, we do look at effectiveness and efficiency in the transit service. So it's possible that we may propose eliminating all or portions of unproductive routes, or just changing routes to better respond what needs are today. Many of the routes in Star Metro's system were developed a number of years ago, and so they were responding to the needs at the time. And of course, different development has happened, different patterns have changed, so we're looking at all of those things. We also anticipate making recommendations on frequency of service. So this might mean that a route that currently has 2 buses coming per hour, so that's a bus every 30 minutes, we might recommend doubling that to a 15-minute service, for example. We're also going to continue looking at transfers. If we see that there are certain origins and destinations that are creating multi-leg trips for folks, we will look at opportunities to find ways that we could make it a one-ride trip, if possible. So we'll be looking at all of those things and making some recommendations that Star Metro can consider implementing in the short and the midterm. I do want to mention as well that equity has been a big part of our analysis. We talk a lot about efficiency and effectiveness, but mobility isn't just about being the most efficient. I think in our individual trips, of course, we're trying to get from point A to point B in the most effective, cost-effective, time-effective way that we can. But we recognize that there are different needs in this community. And so with this analysis, it's not just about being as efficient and effective, it's also about understanding what the needs are and tailoring these recommendations to be effective, but be effective in meeting those needs. With that, I am happy to take any questions, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. One is bus shelters. I hear that all the time, the unsheltered bus shelters where there's just a bench. It is not conducive, especially in rain and heat, to people catching the bus. I'm sure that's an obstacle that a lot of people face. Is that something that you all have discussed and will be maybe addressing at some point? I know funding is an issue, but...
Yes, we actually, this is consistent, I think, across transit systems throughout the country, okay. more stop-level amenities. And we did hear that throughout the public outreach, so that is something that we're thinking about in this study and where we can prioritize those resources.
Okay, all right. And then, you know, we just heard a presentation about the future of transportation, and certainly mass transportation has to play a role in that. Are you all coordinating in that respect? I mean, we talked earlier about the traffic on Thomasville Road.
Yes.
I don't know if, and I know that we've had routes in that area before in Southwood that had to be abandoned because people weren't necessarily using them, but that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to get people out of those cars coming from those remote areas downtown. And so what can we expect in the future in terms of our mass transportation system addressing those issues as well?
I want to echo something that Allison said in the last presentation, which is the desire and really the requirement to make public transit seamless, to make all of our modes of transportation seamless.
Right.
So it's just as easy to take the bus or ride your bike as it is to take your car today, if you have a car. And not every household has a vehicle available. So we know that we want to serve those households, but we also want to entice riders who have a choice. So Allison referred to those as choice riders, to make the choice to use transit or use an alternative mode. That means we've got to have better routes. It means that we've got to have routes that have higher frequency, so they come more often. It also means that we've got to have the sort of capital infrastructure, the stop level amenities like shelters, benches, street trees along the sidewalks, so that if you are walking 3/4 of a mile to your job, it's not so uncomfortable that it would disincent you from using transit. So, you know, there are limited resources available, and we've got to be thoughtful about that, but there is a whole host of reasons why it's important to invest, and Star Metro is working with FDOT and other agency partners to sort of leverage those resources.
Okay, and I know you all are moving in the direction of the electric buses.
And Director Slay had something on point on that. No, you're fine.
Just a quick point, and I'm actually, Andre, I'm glad you left this slide up here, because I think this is a good snapshot. Kind of reading the fine print, it mentions the fact that this is based on adjusted population density and employment density. I'm assuming income as well. Is that a component? So, Commissioner Richardson, you see kind of the issue that you have is a lot of your demand, when you look at Killearn and the other parts of the Northeast, your higher income areas, you don't have that much demand. Right. I think that goes back to what Andrea was saying, the fact that, you know, you've got to incentivize them either through improved service or something like that to get them on the bus, because that's always going to be your struggle, is your middle and higher income areas by and large just aren't necessarily going to, they're going to stay in their car. But I think this map gives you a perfect idea of where some of those areas are. Yeah. You know, that you're going to have more, it's going to be harder to get folks in those areas on transit than in other areas.
And, you know, and it's so interesting because, I mean, you hear it all the time, people complaining about the traffic on Thomasville Road. Sure. But still they get up in the morning and jump in their car to come into town. You know, so I mean, but that's something that we've struggled with that, with our mass transportation system over the years. But I think it's something that we certainly have to continue to look at and encourage, because that's part of what we've heard here this morning, getting people out of those cars, reducing the impact on our carbon footprint. I mean, all of that has to be planned together, and our mass transportation system is an integral part of that if we're going to make that happen. The other thing I had was we were at one of the community meetings at Jack McLean, and the issue came up of the Amazon distribution center, and how would people from, say, the south side of town or the western part of the city and county, if they don't have transportation, if they wanted to seek employment, I guess at one of those two, now that they're on both ends of the county, will there be plans for that?
The TDP, the Transit Development Plan, does look at the, shifting employment trends, not just, both where employment is and the kinds of needs those places have. And so, yes, we are looking at that. I wasn't at that particular meeting. Andrea, I don't know if you happen to be.
Yeah, I can shed a little light on that. We're working closely with Amazon on some options to provide transit service out there. Hope to have those in the next couple of weeks. Also, we have on order 30 shelters that we'll be putting out probably February, March of next year using blueprint money. And we'll continue to do that as well. So.
Okay. And then lastly, Mr. Chairman, and this goes back to my affinity for the rural areas where I spent 20 years of my professional career or more. But I know that when I was in Gadsden County, and we do have an express that runs between the two, but is it possible that Star Metro could plan in more of from a regional perspective, as opposed to, and it may not be possible, but I know that there are opportunities for that and there is a need. So is it possible that Star Metro can plan in from a more of a regional perspective and partner with our rural communities to provide transportation in that regard as well?
I know that partnership is a priority, and as well as coordination, and I'll defer to you to.
Yeah, so we did coordinate with Gadsden County on the Gadsden Express, operated by Big Bend Transit. They also have a Havana Express that comes in 27 and hooks up with our system at the Lake Jackson Trading Post, I think. Is that still what it's called? Out on Fred George. And Big Bend, I think, just started an express route from Monticello as well that comes into CK Steel Plaza.
Okay.
So it's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We got Commissioner Williams-Cox, followed by Commissioner Minor, followed by Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you. We just changed routes. It was just pre-COVID. And so when I heard you say that the routes hadn't been looked at in a while, but I know we did, because I rode the bus and we got some surveys. So do we have good results from what those changes were? Because I've heard some positive things and I've heard some negative things. And so here we are looking at changing again, and I know that change is inevitable, but the results of the last change, what is that telling us?
Well, Star Metro does service changes multiple times a year to tweak services and schedules and try to improve on-time performance and respond to comments that they receive. So that's what I imagine those changes probably were. Anything that seems to be working well, we wouldn't necessarily propose to change, but we do take the feedback that we receive and we kind of combine that with the data coming from the passenger counts and see where we can improve things. And so I'd be happy to follow up on a route by route basis with you if that would be helpful.
Well, in 2020, surely we're not using data from 2020 to help determine any changes, because people were working from home, school was at home. There were a lot of things that we didn't need mass transit for as much as we have in the past. So what role did that data play?
So we are looking at data primarily from pre-COVID. However, we also know that people's patterns are changing now. I mean, they were different during the pandemic, but even going forward, we expect that more people will telecommute, for example. We know that things are going to be a little bit different now. So we are trying to respond to those changes using the best, most stable sources of pre-pandemic data that are available.
Commissioner, if I can, the last route changes were in 2019, and before those changes, our on-time performance was about 79%. Since those changes, it's averaging about 86%.
Okay.
So the changes really helped us. Our goal is at least 90%, but we're getting there.
Okay. Is there Wi-Fi capability on the Star Metro buses?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that too will help. And to your point, Commissioner Richardson, I was in grad school in the late 80s, and we did a project on ridership on public transit from the Northeast, and they weren't riding then either.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to sell it more. Since one of our retreats, we spent a lot of time talking about traffic jams in the Northeast and Midtown. The way to prevent that is mass transit.
Yeah.
But instead, we're widening highways and we're creating roundabouts and we're creating solutions to keep parking garages, car washes, to have more cars on the road. So if we're really serious about reducing the number of cars on the highway, we've got to sell another means of transportation, such as mass transit. And perhaps we need to sell it in a way that speaks to the renewable energy plan that we have adopted, and get more people to co-ride instead of bringing cars in and clogging up the highways. And one of the big discussions we had at Blueprint was dealing with parent pickup at schools. And just so there are just a number of things that I know that our communities are changing. But and I know you know this, I'm just sharing that our marketing for our public transit has to change with it, even though we're not getting a lot of survey results. People are not taking time to do surveys, and I don't know how long the survey is. If it's more than 10 seconds or so, they don't take the time to do them. And folks like myself who will do surveys, but you wonder what happened to the results, why you don't get the results back, or what difference does it make. So I think that these are all some things that we need to just look at and consider as we're going forward to talk about making those changes. And I think too with the Southside Transit that's going to be coming as the Blueprint project, that's going to require some other changes as well. So are we already looking ahead at what that kind of change might do, as opposed to having everybody go downtown to make this change? Now you can make that, get around town anywhere you want from the Southside Transit site. So those are just questions that I have about what kind of impact that information will have on any future changes that we may have, and whether the data trends showing us that we can rely on going forward to make these kinds of changes. Thank you.
I'm actually glad that you brought all of those comments up, because two things that I neglected to mention amongst our findings and recommendations in the TDP relate to a more robust marketing strategy, and something, just as you suggest, that sort of speaks to what is compelling to people today. And then the other thing is other sorts of infrastructure support. So for example, some park and rides in some strategic locations where folks could drive their cars to the park and rides and then take transit to their final destination, relieving some of the more urban congestion. And then Andrea, do you want to speak to Southside?
Yeah, so we are in the process of an RFP to hire a consultant to help us. How do we redesign routes with the inclusion of a transit facility on the south side? So, recommendations from COA, TDP, and this study, which is the HOPE grant that we received from FTA, helping obtain prosperity for everyone based on opportunity zones on the south side. So we'll take the information from all three of these studies to then make recommendations for route changes. So it's going to be a while. It's not, we're not going to do route changes, do another study, do route changes. We'll combine them all together and do it all at one time.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Minor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. One of them is shared with Commissioner Richardson, the question he brought up about the Amazon Fulfillment Center to the east and the Amazon warehouse to the west. And Andrea, I think I heard you correctly saying that you're coordinating with Amazon right now and you expect to have something released in the next few weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, we got with them on what their change of shift schedules are and coming up with, a couple of proposals, but funding's going to be an issue.
Okay, but the considerations that you're working with them on are for both facilities, is that correct?
No, right now, just the fulfillment center, on Mahan.
Okay.
We have not worked with them yet on the west side.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we've gotten a lot of information yet on
Right.
the number of personnel at that other facility to the west yet, so, okay. But that's something I think I think the CRTPA and the City Commission and the County Commission will be very interested in. I'm sure we've all heard from constituents that have expressed some interest in making sure that we have public transportation going to those both those facilities.
Absolutely,
So,
we'd be happy to work with you on that.
thank you very much. And then to both of you, first of all, thanks for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I've had conversations with a pastor with a large congregation who's expressed an interest in providing more public transportation to his constituents, to his congregation. How would he and his congregation express their interest for expanded service for the TDP analysis?
Well, I think that we could start with just getting contact information, and our project team or Star Metro staff can reach out to that person directly so that we can get the information as quickly as possible into
That sounds
the
great.
study.
I'll connect with both of you after this meeting. So I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, hot topic of the day, thank you for the presentation as well, is the Amazon question. So appreciate Commissioner Richardson and mine, or Mr. Chair, bringing it up. So just building on what you've already said, and I'm going to focus on Andrea since you've got the latest update on this. In response to Commissioner Minor, you just said that funding will be an issue. So this is one of those unique situations where the Amazon Fulfillment Center is in Leon County, so we had the development review, but the Antique Car Museum, right on the border of that property, is within the city limits. So we're kind of, I mean, we're just right on the city limits. We're in the USA, and when we did the development review approval at the county, this was one of the issues that we raised, and we asked the county administrator to work with city manager and you all to address this. So in my experience in the past, when we have looked at a facility, and my favorite one for my district is the library on Pedrick. When we moved, you know this well.
Yep.
And when we moved this from Appalachia Parkway to Pedrick, we lost bus access because, and not as many people could access that library because it is in the county. So there may be some county facilities like that where I think the conversation that developed years ago was it would have to be county funded if we wanted to extend service there before Star Metro may make that decision on their own, or if that ever happened. But when we look at a major employer like Amazon, and we now will have 2 facilities, it seems like it is in the interest of all of us, but I will say, I mean, this is my one opportunity, so I'm speaking to the city and to Star Metro, that extending bus service to the facility would be in Star Metro's interest, even though it's just outside the city line. So I wanted to frame that question because this isn't something I get to ask a lot. I mean, it comes up here, but obviously this is a City of Tallahassee issue. So is the funding that you referenced, is that question because it is in Leon County and just outside the city limits, or is there some other challenge there?
Well, I mean, our budget is our budget. If we need to extend a fixed route, you know, it's so much per hour, so much per mile, and I believe it's about 4 miles to extend it out there. And then hours of service are going to be extended. We'd have to change frequencies on that route. It can be done, and we'll work with Amazon and the county to make sure it gets done. But there's some other options. You know, is there an express route we could run? Is there a flex route that could, you know, directly serve the library, maybe directly serve Westminster with their, you know, staff that may need to, you know, use transit to get out there. So we're working on a few options that we'll bring to leadership, city leadership, and get direction on that.
Okay. I don't mean to put you in the hot seat because these are other budget considerations, and I was trying to be careful there. I would love to see, and this is uniquely for Leon and Tallahassee, but it does connect with all of our other counties for employment, that if and when we see a large employer like Amazon come in, that bus service is one of those top considerations. And I think Commissioner Richardson, I really appreciate hearing you echo the same thoughts that we've had at the county side. if we do an incentive through Blueprint OEV, if we look to approve a development review like that, it seems like this is one of those critical factors that we need to make sure gets worked out, and we help our staff kind of look at those issues. So if there was a way for city and county to work together on that in the future, I would just like to explore that. And I will add one other example here. TrueLeave is listed as one of the top 10 employers. You do have a note in the report that the agriculture, I mean, most of it is outside of Leon County, right? Mm-hmm. So does that get to the Big Bend Transit, the express route to Gadsden? Is that where you're capturing? Is that why TrueLeave pops up on that list? Or are they just one of the big employers and you're really not providing bus service for those employees? Do we know?
Yeah, I think they, we just looked at
just the employers.
The employer,
okay.
Just the numbers, yes.
Okay. That just helps clarify it for me, because we may have large employers outside of Leon County where we see people going from Leon to work at those jobs, or we're bringing in folks from McCullough, Gadsden, and Jefferson into Tallahassee to work at other jobs. So I really like the regional approach as well, Commissioner Richardson. Thank you again for bringing that one up. So I think this gets into more policy development and thinking through that and helping to support our staff. That was my primary question. Oh, actually, one related to that. I'm thinking about all of our new folks coming on. So Innovation Park, and Mr. Chair and everyone, forgive me, I was late. I was at Innovation Park for a meeting, double booked today. For a place like that, I know we have the contracts with the universities, I believe, and
FSU, yes.
With FSU, mm-hmm. And there is a bus route that goes out to Innovation Park. Is there separate access for the general public to who just works at Danfoss or other facilities out there, or can they use the FSU buses? How does that work in an area like that?
Yeah, so the FSU buses obviously under contract with FSU for students, faculty, and staff, but they're also free and open to the public.
Okay, that's great. That was just something that popped up when I was looking at the employers. So, all right, thank you. Y'all are doing a lot of work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Richardson took most of my points today, but before I come back, I had two questions. One, when we do data collection, do we look at how long it takes from someone to get from their point of origin to their destination, on actual ridership of how long the process takes?
Once they're on the bus?
Right.
We do look at that, and that is part of the transfer analysis.
Okay.
Some people do have very long commutes, and those we want to see where that's happening a lot, and those are among our highest priority to change and find solutions for.
Okay. And do we look at, obviously, the demand and the ridership we have now for improvements? Do we look at where roadways are the most congested, where bus service would serve a traffic release purpose, or is it all directed based on current ridership?
The COA, for the short term, more tactical recommendations, that is more based on current ridership and trends. The transit development plan is over 10 years, so congestion plays a part of that, but that's not the primary focus. Star Metro, though, is in sort of constant collaboration with FDOT and the city, and is, that on-time performance is affected by congestion. So that's always an issue that is part of these studies, but just ongoing operations.
Okay. Commissioner Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that I wanted to add, because it kind of undergirds all of the conversation that we've had this morning, has been woven throughout just about everybody's comments, is this whole issue of funding. And you all correct me if I'm wrong, but Star Metro's budget is supplemented by the city's general fund. on an annual basis. So whatever we do, we have to keep that in mind. And so that's why funding is at the top of the conversation when it comes to Star Metro. And we try to keep the fares within reach of those people who do actually need it. So just to keep that in mind as we move forward, and the kinds of innovations and additional services that we'd like to see Star Metro provide, that it is not self-sustaining, that it is supplemented by the city's general fund on an annual basis. So that's another issue to consider as we move forward as well, and I'm sure you all are well aware of that. I'm not telling you anything new. But I just wanted to put that out there, Mr. Chairman, as something that we all need to be aware of as we move forward.
Absolutely. Commissioner Williams-Cox?
I was going to say on point, the primary funding comes from federal grants.
Yes.
And the city supplements the primary grants.
Right.
And I was just talking with Commissioner Villavisier about the possibility of Gadsden Express collaborating with Star Metro to learn about those types of grants that are being awarded to perhaps expand service there. And then there would possibly be more ways to get folks from Gadsden County to Leon County to some of these jobs and in other counties as well, so that it's not a matter of whether Star Metro has the capacity, because right now, as I understand, there's a shortage of drivers. And so, that's an impact that, we weren't counting on, but, COVID has helped make this a situation. And so the routes that we do have and that we're able to staff is a, I won't say it's a struggle, because I know you guys are making it happen, but it's stressful. It is stressful. So keep that in mind as well. It's funding is a big part of it, but funding comes from the federal government and we supplement it with the city budget. But there are other factors too that determines where the bus goes and how it can go. So we welcome others who want to join in this funding, Mr. Chairman, too. And we'll send Star Metro wherever you want it to go for a small fee.
Thank you. I got Director Slay on point, and then I'll come to Commissioner Dozier for the last comments on this item.
Point of clarification, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think actually the City of Tallahassee's, what they put into Star Metro actually exceeds what both the feds and the state put in, correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
So I would say, Commissioner Cox, it's more like the city is
The major,
or DOT and the feds are actually supplementing what the city puts in.
right.
Not
Well,
vice
that's
versa.
a great correction. When we're looking at the budget, we see big numbers. But we were hoping that we were getting more numbers from the feds, but okay, thank you.
Then what he's saying is he loves the city of Tallahassee, right? We will, moving on to the next item, if there's no further comment, Pensacola Street roadway safety audit. Thank you for the presentation.
Up next, we have Mike Lewis from DOT. The clicker, let's see, let him get it loaded. We had some issues with that with the previous presentations. And Mike's going to talk with us about the Pensacola Street roadway safety audit, and I'm going to leave a little bit on Orange Avenue once this gets going. Okay.
There we go. Do I control the slides here?
I believe, yes, sir.
Yes, just the arrows? Okay. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm Michael Lewis. I'm the traffic safety engineer for FDOT District 3, covering the Panhandle District. We did a safety audit, roadway safety audit. There we go. At the request of the Carney Center, reached out to us back in 2019. There were a couple of pedestrian fatalities of people who use their facilities, generally in the evenings, in dark conditions, and we were asked to come in and take a look to see if there was anything DOT could do. And so it was, roadway safety audit is a little more granular and localized where we partner with the local stakeholders, I guess you would say. And we do field reviews, and we really try to understand more in depth what the issues are to come up with the solutions. We did conduct a field review in December of 2019. This was pre-COVID. This was attended by the city, the county. We did have Tallahassee PD was there. We had Big Bend Homeless Coalition, representatives from the Carney Center, and the study limits were from Appleyard all the way out to Stadium. So we did have some quite extensive, that's about a mile, I believe, maybe a little more than a mile. And so we have a number of pedestrian issues and users along. As you get closer to campus, you have a lot of students using. You have establishments along Pensacola Street. And then in the vicinity of the Carney Center, there were a lot of crossing activities. And so what we looked for was ways to make that easier, make it better. And so we're going to go through some of the results that we came up with. But we did coordinate extensively. One of the problems is that the COVID restrictions hit, and right after we did our field reviews, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Carney Center was actually closed down, and a lot of the people that use that facilities were relocated. So for a while there, we did not even have any activity, and we weren't even sure who to contact. We haven't really done our follow-up with the representatives there to go over our results, and we do plan to do that. I'm not sure this is going to be visible or not, but we did go through and come up with a matrix of recommendations. Some of the recommendations we handle through our maintenance department, and then some of them we actually will plan a project and we will advance it for construction in the future. And so if you look at this matrix, these are intersection recommendations. These are the major intersections along Tennessee Street. And so one of the signals, we noticed that we need to adjust the pedestrian timings. We're going to handle that through maintenance. Restripe all the crosswalks to be high emphasis. That's every intersection except for White Drive. So instead of having the two parallel lines as a crosswalk, you have the bars across the street. They're more visible. So we're going to upgrade those through our maintenance department. We've actually been in contact with them, and we've already put that in motion. And that's at Appleyard, Dupree, Ostley, Ocala, Lapona, and Chapel Drive. Replace yield sign. We noticed a yield sign needed replacing at Appleyard. We're going to do that with maintenance. There is some tree trimming. One of the traffic signals, some of the limbs come down and block the view. It's just merely clearing that out a little bit. The detectable warning pads, these are just those little yellow pads on the ADA ramps with the bumps on them. We're going to upgrade some of those. And then we noticed there was a damaged pull box at one of the intersections. We're going to do that. These are corridor recommendations. So these are ones that don't necessarily occur at intersections, but there are some sidewalk repairs that need to be done just to level them out. There's cracking also from trees and other reasons. But we've got these locations. There's some tripping hazards due to drop-offs. We did locate between Dupree and White Street. Replace speed limit sign was one of the things we recommended. Trim vegetation, and there was a bike ped sign out at the east end of the corridor that we identified. These are some, I know this is small, I'll go ahead and read these. So the things that aren't handled through maintenance, we actually do a project in our work program, and I'll get to some of the scheduling on that, because we actually did program a project in our work program that we can discuss. But so when you look at the intersection recommendations, there are some pedestrian signal heads that need to be fixed or replaced at Appleyard, and we'll take care of that in this project. Upgrade intersection lighting. What we find a lot of times where we have nighttime pedestrian issues, that corridor lighting specifically, I know we say intersection lighting, but we plan corridor lighting. So all the way from Appleyard all the way to Stadium, we're going to upgrade the lighting out there to be the new LED lighting. We often do these projects in contract with the local utilities. They do those for us at a fraction of the cost that we would do if DOT were to construct it. And we've done those here in the Tallahassee area. Gulf Power is a big partner that we use for that, but we do plan to advance lighting. There are some recommendations on some of the equipment out there. It doesn't quite come up to current design standards. We're going to add some of the internally illuminated roadway signs, so when you come up to an intersection, you'll know what the intersection is because of the light-up sign. We're going to upgrade the signal heads to the new 4-section heads. They're the ones with the flashing yellow arrow. Those actually give you more flexibility to do timing pattern changes. We're doing a lot of those. Sometimes we have different timing patterns in the peak periods as we do in the non-peak, so we're going to add that equipment to be able to have that flexibility. And then there's some sidewalk and crosswalk details there on those last 3 lines. These are corridor recommendations that are going to be included in the safety project. Install mid-block crossings. We're looking at 2 locations. One of them is between Appleyard and Dupree, and one of them is between Dupree and White Street. And what these are going to involve is making sure that we have a mid-block pedestrian refuge. So in that area, you've got a 5-lane section. It's got a left turn lane, continuous left turn in places. So we have space in the middle of the roadway where the median is to be able to put a raised median to give pedestrians refuge. Just a strategy we do to add to the safety. And then we're going to add the flashing beacons. They call them the RRFBs, rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And they just give you higher visibility. They work daytime and nighttime. Often we put them in solar powered. I think that's probably what we're going to do here. But we can put them in hardwired. It just depends how long the batteries will last. Sometimes we do an evaluation to see whether or not it's better to hardwire them, but that's what that's going to look like. We're going to put some speed feedback signs on the corridor, make people aware that here's the speed limit, here's how fast you're going, please slow down. Those are going to be in the section between Dupree Street and White Street. We're going to add a boarding and a lighting pad for the bus stop. Located in that Dupree Street to White Street vicinity, and obviously we'll talk to Star Metro and make sure that we're doing that to their standards. Reconfigure sidewalk around power poles. We noticed in a number of locations that because of where power poles were placed or other things, that it's right in the middle of the sidewalk, and you don't have the 4 feet minimum that you need to have in the urban areas. And we're going to make sure that those locations, we make the adjustments so that people can traverse the sidewalk if they're in a wheelchair or some other device. And then between White Drive and Osley Drive, we noticed in one of the locations there was a bit of a drop-off. When the drop-off gets to a certain standard, we put handrails in, and we noticed that we had a location there that needed handrails, so we'll make sure we include that. We did advance a project into the work program, and typically we're designing, or we're adding to the new 5th year. So we do have the ability to design it sooner. In fiscal year 23, we've, anytime you see the DOT, we work in phases. So 3 is generally design and engineering, and a 5 is usually construction. Okay, so 32 is design. We have funds to do that in fiscal year 23. Fiscal year 23 begins July 1st, 2022. So that's about a year away that we would actually start the design work. Phase 52, it would be the core of the work, everything but the lighting. The lighting is to phase 58. That's done under a JPA with the local power company, and that's why we separate those out. So those are in fiscal year 26. We do look for opportunities when funding is available sooner to advance these. I think specifically the lighting is something that we're going to look to expedite if we can. And it may be possible, too, that some of the other elements of these improvements can be split out and done sooner. So our next steps in our process is making sure that we keep coordinating through the CRTPA staff. I think we do have to get a stakeholder meeting back together and go through these. I think we have a little time to make adjustments clearly if there are any changes needed to be made. And I think we would also look to make sure that we have our funding set right so that we can do everything that we talked about here today. So we do have copies of the report. We have delivered them to the CRTPA. They do have them. I'm not sure if that was put in the agenda packages or not, but if anybody would like one, we can provide that. And then certainly we'll be coordinating through Greg to make sure that we have the right communication on this. So, any questions?
Well, thank you. Excellent presentation. Any questions, Commissioner?
Yeah, Mike, you want to talk about Orange Avenue as well?
Sorry.
That's the MIMS. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, we've come up with, and I don't have anything to show for it right now, but we do have a tech memo prepared. I think I sent that to you, if I'm not mistaken. We looked at, and again, our RFBs, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Typically, we put them at mid-block locations, but we also have a couple of examples where we've used them at intersections, and they work well when your side street has low traffic levels. And I think at this location, we could probably put our RFBs at crosswalks at the intersections that come into Orange Avenue. I guess that's from the north, right? School's on the south side, so these roads come into Orange. I forget the name of the intersection where the traffic signal is, but these are both to the west.
Pasco Street.
So we could either focus on one intersection, or we could put them at two intersections, and that would just help to bring visibility to the crosswalks. Right. And I think COVID's kind of upset everything these days, but I think our intention was to get with the principal of the school and maybe get his guidance or her guidance. I don't know who the principal is, but get their guidance on what would make the most sense at that location.
Yeah, well, the issue is the kids are crossing. They're supposed to cross at the traffic light, but of course they don't. They cross mid-block because that's where the residences are in the Bond community, and there's a convenience store across the street, and so they go to the convenience store and then they try to cross mid-block, and there's also a Star Metro bus stop there, mid-block. Right. And so the adults, when they want to catch the bus, they cross mid-block. And so the principal told me that he has to send staff out to shoo the kids down to the, when they cross, to shoo them down to the traffic light. And they have a crossing guard there to escort them across, of course. But it's been an issue. We just are fortunate that nothing has happened to any of those kids. The other location, and it's similar in terms of the dynamics, and I understand it's a more difficult issue because there are no sidewalks, and that's a little farther west on Orange Avenue at Liberty Park. Same thing. There's a convenience store across the street from the neighborhood. There's a bus stop, and people are and that traffic right there on Orange Avenue is horrendous. But people are having to cross, and there is no crosswalk, and I understand it's more difficult to put one there because there are not sidewalks on that stretch of Orange Avenue. But
and if I remember that location, you have a convenience store and a gas station, and people kind of cut through the business property to kind of get to connect between sidewalk here and sidewalk here, and then they're crossing, and there may not be continuous sidewalk through the area also. And so I know we've taken a look at that, and at the point when I had to choose one to be able to align with what we could provide, and the one at the school was easier to crack, so we looked at that one. So anytime you want to set a meeting up, I'd be happy to come over and sit and talk with the principal or anybody who's who would kind of be involved in what decision to make here.
Sure.
So just let me know.
Okay. Greg, who would take the lead on making that?
We can do that and work with Mike. I think, and talking to Commissioner Richardson, he talks about they're sending staff out, so I think that plays into what we had talked about, whether, we try to cross them in one or two locations or something like that. So I think that meeting probably needs to happen sooner than later.
Sure. One might be simpler, but we found too sometimes when you use these RFBs, you know, they're warning beacons. They're not, it's not like a red light where you have to stop. And sometimes when you put more than one location in close proximity, they reinforce each other. So the one application in Panama City that we did, it works very well. We have two intersections, two successive intersections, and you know, people just, they slow down, and there's a higher visibility of the pedestrian activity. So that might be a reason why we would do two, not one.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see what makes sense.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Williams-Cox, followed by Commissioner Dozier.
I was going to mention that I noticed, Commissioner Richardson, that one of those convenience stores is not closed and is for sale, and that's the one that sits on the south side of Orange Avenue at Spring Hill Road. And I wanted to ask, what do you call it? What are those rumbles? There with the flashing lights to get pedestrians, to get cars to slow down. Could you also include those little raised rumblings or?
They call them transverse rumble strips.
Okay, there.
Yes.
To help them know to slow up. If they're not paying attention, they're not seeing the flashing lights,
right.
At least hearing might cause them to slow up as well.
We can look at that, certainly.
I'm sorry?
I said we can look at that, certainly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sticking with this, I like, there's good progress. I like the options, but the Panama City example, that really was interesting to me because we have had an issue with people seeing the crosswalks when they're not at a light and everything, and I think just anecdotally seeing more go into Midtown, people are getting more used to them when we have a cluster of those. Gaines Street might be another one. So I'm glad you brought up that example, and I'd love to hear more as we go on just about those types of examples and how the proximity of those walks will really signal to drivers that they need to slow down, or the rumble strips or anything like that. To Pensacola really quick, we had an issue, this is probably going back 6, 7, 8 years, with ADA accessibility at some of those, I think it was around White Drive or some other areas. So I'm glad to hear you looking at really detailed study, it sounds like, of those intersections and making sure the ADA accessibility is good at each one of those crossings, right?
Yes.
And if I'm remembering correctly, this is not for you, Michael, it's for Greg. And I'm not going to put Autumn on the spot, I know you're here, but the Blueprint Pensacola project comes up to Appleyard from Capitol Circle. Okay, Autumn's nodding, so I'm good with that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was thinking about this correctly, because you are going to Appleyard and we're not overlapping with anything on the Blueprint side.
And we didn't coordinate that, but it's interesting to know that that's where it meets. So
I think, we have more work that's on CRTPA list, other things, so it's farther out, but just making sure we're coordinating when we have to, but abutting the two projects is probably a good thing.
Well, and
Would that be right, Craig?
Yes, ma'am, but I believe too, if you remember, we did a corridor review on that portion of Pensacola a couple of years ago, and we identified, Mike, if you remember, there was an issue with the TCC driveway just to the west of Appleyard, and I think you guys were going to incorporate that into some of the work that you were doing.
I believe we looked at it. I don't remember any treatments that we recommended there. Okay. I think the pedestrian activity really tails, the pedestrian facilities tail off as you get west of Appleyard.
I think this was more, there was a crash issue, if you remember, because if I remember correctly, there's a driveway on the north side of Pensacola coming out of TCC that actually crosses over the Gore area. And I thought you guys may have been looking at that, even though that was a vehicular, not a pedestrian issue on that. But we can follow back up with that.
Yeah, and I don't recall. I'll have to go back and look at that.
Okay. You've answered my questions, though. I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on the project scope and all of that.
And to the point of multiple locations with the flashing beacons, there's a corridor in Tampa where they first brought these into, and it's a bigger arterial. It's Fletcher Avenue. Oh. And it's this would be in the areas, I believe it's between I-275 and I-75. And they have overhead mast arms with the beacons on them. And they have it set up where, there's a strategy with these where you offset the crosswalks on the two halves of the roadway so that in the median, you actually turn towards the oncoming traffic of the second leg you're going to be crossing so that you're paying attention to traffic on both halves of the roadway. And there's about, I believe there's 4 of them in succession. And it gets quite a bit of activity, and people just are conditioned on Fletcher Avenue to watch for the beacons, watch for pedestrians, and it all works. It's very unique to that area,
Yeah.
but they had a big outreach campaign when they put these in place, and people just know what to do. It's really interesting.
Ms. Chair, thank you for adding that, Michael. You brought another one to mind, which is the Lake Ella, the Monroe Crossing. And when we put in the medians, they're not really medians, but the
Refuge.
Refuge,
Yes.
thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. I see people coming down from both sides, from 7th Avenue and from Tharp. They see that light. I mean, they treat it almost like a traffic light. I hope that's true in general, but I often see people stopping at that. But the offsetting the crosswalk, that's a really interesting concept. So all of this is education for drivers, for pedestrians as well. So that's why I was picking up on those notes. And I think as we go forward, having those examples in mind could be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Moving on, I think we can wrap this meeting up by noon. So, Director Slay, take us away with the project updates and our
Just a couple of things. I want to circle back to the transit discussion very briefly. If you all remember, we actually budgeted money to go.
There's lunch. We'll take lunch. We'll conclude the meeting, and lunch will be available.
Okay, sorry. If you recall, we had actually budgeted funds earlier this year, I guess, to do a regional transit study. That was something that Commissioner Maddox brought up, I believe, early last year. We still have that money there, but the thought there was that we would wait until Star Metro finished up with their work to kind of build upon. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to do it this way. I'm vaccinated, so. But earlier this year, you approved money for a regional transit study, but we had decided to wait until Star Metro finished up their work so we could build upon that. So that money is still available if you all choose to move that forward. A couple of the things we're going to be looking at, and it was telling, if you recall in Allison's presentation, she showed a pie chart, I believe, that showed about a 7-fold increase in telecommuting over the last year or so. I was at a conference, our MPO National Conference a couple of weeks ago, and Miami-Dade did an interesting study where they looked at the impacts of telecommuting in their community. So that's something over the next few months I'd like to undertake, is looking at both the short-term and potentially the long-term impacts of telecommuting here in Tallahassee. In the 4-county area, I mean, there's a lot of state offices. From what I've been able to, in talking to folks in various state departments, it's just kind of a hodgepodge of how they're all dealing with telecommuting. So I think that would be good for us to at least take a look, kind of get an idea of what some of the major employers, including the state, are doing, and those that lend themselves to telecommuting, and see, you know, what kind of impact that potentially has for us in the long term. You know, there's varying schools of thought. Some folks think it's temporary, some think it's more long term. There's some generational aspects to it when you get down to really start to take a look at it. But I think it would be good for us to take a look at it again and see what that potential long-term implications for us would be. The other item would bring it to you in a few months is probably to go ahead and do at least a preliminary freight study with Amazon facilities coming online. I think it's time that we go ahead and kind of take a look at freight impact. I mean, by and large, you know, we don't have a lot of companies that generate tremendous amounts of heavy truck traffic. I've had some experience in Ocala with large distribution centers, a couple of them 2 million square feet. So they can have some impact, but I think it's probably time that we go ahead and at least do some initial data collection and kind of see and look at some of our choke points and things like that, and move that forward to see if we need to develop, you know, a long-term plan that's geared towards freight. I think probably what we'll find, a lot of what we have here is your UPS trucks, your smaller delivery trucks. But I think it's at least time, you know, to generate some of that information and see what we truly have out there and make some decisions on where to go forward from there.
And if I may, I'd like to address our Jefferson County exits 7 miles down the road there. And I truly believe that Lloyd area is going to be impacted with that, particularly since we're getting ready to do a feasibility study on either putting a package plant at that interchange, or taken the affluent from Lloyd and into Monticello. I'm not sure how that's going to work. And another thought could be that we could take that affluent and take it over there to where the Amazon's going to be. I'm not, we're looking at all of that. But I think it'd be wise to take a look at how those centers are going to impact that next exit over to your east, because people are asking questions about that. And of course, you know that, well, you don't know, there's almost 200 acres right there at the interchange that's just transferred over to a new owner, and they're working with Kimley Horn on feasibility of that area too. So there's a lot going on at that interchange that I believe needs to be incorporated into our regional studies of how that transportation is going to move from Jefferson County into Leon County. Already it's happening. It's been happening. You know, we're a bedroom community in Jefferson anyway, but I think you're going to see a whole lot more clogging up that interstate, more so than what they do right now. So if you will, incorporate Jefferson County into that and take a look at that.
Yes, ma'am, we would. And I think I-10 would be a vital portion of that. I know the intersection at US 90 and Midway, there's a lot of truck activity there, so that would be, we'd be looking at all 4 counties. I think more so in Gadsden and Jefferson, focusing more on the interstate itself, but also too in Jefferson County, the circle there in Monticello. I mean, there's some truck issues associated with that as well, though I'm not promising anything on that one.
We know how those residents, those businesses down in downtown Monticello feel about a bypass, but if it's needed, it's needed. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Dr. V, followed by Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to, again, pitch my request, and I'll keep on pitching these requests until they gain traction. These are the same requests I just made earlier on, and I'm going to keep on making them in this board meetings. The crosswalk on Pat Thomas Parkway from Captain D's Restaurant to Walgreen. The crosswalk on Pat Thomas Parkway from National Guard Armory to Walmart. Some kind of traffic light signal at the intersection of State Route 12 and Point Milligan Road in front of Ivy Funeral Home in Quincy, and a Highway 27 going north left turn lane onto Gibson Sawmill Road in Havana. And if you need for me to District 3, if you need for me to email this to you or you have them down, I will surely appreciate it if we begin to work on this as a part of our immediate future project, a quick plan. We will surely appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good list, Greg. So I assume moving forward, say with the regional transit study, any of those things, we need to come back at our next board meeting and take those votes. So you don't need direction today or anything like that, correct?
No, ma'am. The regional transit study is already in the budget. For the telecommuting and the freight study, we would probably look to start those in the next budget year, which for us would start July 1st of next year.
Okay, yeah, you said it was already in the budget for the regional study, but you had said if we decide to move forward, so I just wasn't sure if there was a decision point there, but we could talk about those at our next board meeting.
Yes, ma'am. I think, though, and Andrew, what's your completion on the COA?
Should be completed January, February, maybe come back to you guys with the final report in March.
Okay. So it may be even that we may just wait and pick that up in July of next year as well.
Okay. I think it's great to wait for the completed study. I just wanted to check that. And with the freight study, the timing's rather interesting here. The Regional Planning Council, along with partners throughout our 9 counties, are preparing to submit a major grant application today. This is part of the Build Back Better Economic Development Administration grant. And all of our counties, there's been a pretty incredible team as part of this. Freight logistics are a huge part of this. So I've not seen the final draft. There's been some moving pieces, but at one point, an inland port at Gretna kind of servicing that facility and a future development of that facility was contemplated. The freight logistics zone, Gadsden, connecting through down to Gulf County and the port there was certainly part of that. And we have the foreign trade zone in progress in connection with the Tallahassee Airport. So all of those aspects, I know we are focused on our 4 counties, but if we get into that, I think it really is a very good thing to look at in the next year, not just for what's happening, as you said, Commissioner Barfield, in Jefferson County. We have some very specific examples, Amazon, others. But I think it would help to get a regional look at that big picture, because if we have freight coming in even from Jackson County or Gulf County, it could impact Gadsden County or Leon or Jefferson or Wakulla. So would that be possible? I know you could work with Chris Rito to bring that other information in. Yes?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was it, Mr. Chair.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. Another successful retreat. If there's no further business, we stand adjourned.
All right, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.